all three of these men also, by the way, are members of the Michael S. Gordon Fellows, which is a program that the Pension Rights Center launched a year ago. The fellows are retired experts in pension field who
jolly good fellows.
They're jolly good fellows, men and women, and they are our advisors. I think I've said this before, but it's not just us. When you call and ask for technical assistance, often I turn around and call one of them, and I think some of you have actually been able to work with them directly too. We've consulted on some cases, and the three of you are truly invaluable, and I'm really looking forward to this. To my right here, this is Henry Rose, and from 1970 to 1974, he was the Associate Solicitor for Legislation and Legal Counsel at the U.S. Department of Labor, and later became PBGC General Counsel. Then we have Frank Cummings. He was the Chief of Staff to U.S. Senator Jacob Javits during the development of ERISA. And Bob Nagle, who was General Counsel of the Senate Committee on Labor and Public Welfare, and later became the Executive Director of the PBGC. And thank you so much for coming. And I think maybe if we could start off by hearing about Studebaker, or and Studebaker's friends.
Funny you should ask.
Funny you should ask. If you really want the whole story, there is, you just go on.
We have an hour and a half.
You can go online and type in Wooten, W-O-O-T-E-N, and the name of the piece that he wrote, which was published in the Buffalo Law Review, but the complete text of it is online. You just type in "the most glorious story of failure in the business, the Studebaker-Packard Corporation and the origins of ERISA," which is what I'm going to talk about. In 1958, I was practicing law in New York at Cravath, Swaine & Moore. It's a pretty big law firm. And one of its clients was the Studebaker-Packard Corporation. And I was in their labor law department. And we had a big labor problem. In fact, we had a war going on. In fact, we had two wars going on. We had one war going on in South Bend and another one going on in Detroit, because the merger of Studebaker and Packard, followed by the merger of the Studebaker pension plan and the Packard pension plan, followed by the collapse of Packard, was threatening Studebaker. Those of you who don't, who are every one of you is too young to remember the Packard, but I am not. And in fact, I was not around during actually I was around for 3 years during Prohibition, but I was too young to appreciate the liquor.
You don't remember because you were drunk.
But the Packard was the favorite rum runner's car. It was a head-to-head competitor with the Cadillac. In the days when cars were boxes, they were square, and the Packard and the Cadillac were big boxes. And the Packard was even bigger, and you could load it up with Canadian Club, and you could tape over the headlights with just a little slit in the middle to light up where you were going, maybe, and you would come charging across the border, and that's what kept the bars open. But by 1958, it was obsolete. So we could go to any corner store, and Packard got out of business, gradually. This is how desperate it gets when you on the brink of that kind of disaster and you happen to live in South Bend. Have you ever been to South Bend? You know South Bend.
I'm from South
You're
Bend.
South.
Watching on TV when they shut Studebaker down and the guys walked out.
The strange things happened. At the time, there were only 3 things in South Bend that made jobs. There was Studebaker, there was Bendix Aviation, and there was Notre Dame. Now, if you get laid off from the assembly line at Studebaker, you were not going to get a job as a professor at Notre Dame. Just not going to happen. It was this desperate that at one point some employee drove into the employee's parking lot driving a Chevrolet, and the union en masse descended upon the plant manager's office demanding that this member of the union be fired immediately. If you were a taxi driver in South Bend and you weren't driving a Studebaker, you would never get a fare. It was a desperate situation. And what happens in an automobile thing when you begin to lay off and shrink, and you're unionized by an old CIO union with plant-wide seniority, every time you shrink, the average age of the workforce gets older because you lay off in reverse order of seniority. So that they were running this plant with 60-year-olds, average. And they had, you didn't worry about vesting. I mean, these guys have been there for 30 years. What does a 30-year-old do if you don't get a pension? I mean, not a 60-year-old with 30 years of service do if you don't get a pension. That's what was the crisis, and I was involved in the litigation that grew out of it, which was tangential because it was really a fight between Packard employees and Studebaker employees. Management had a position, but for those of you who like to worry about lawyer-like problems, and this would be very meaningful, I think, the minute you get out from under ERISA, which is if you're executive comp, if you're a public employee, religious employee, one of those exemptions, these are the problems that the judge asked in South Bend. By the way, he showed up in the courtroom, and it was a mob scene hanging from the rafters, and he thought the union was doing its usual number. They called out the membership to storm the courtroom. So he said what judges always do, which is, I'll see counsel in chambers. And everyone in the courtroom was a lawyer, and we all stormed into into the judge's chambers. And he, I'm hanging from, I'm sitting on a radiator actually at the time. Who's here? And he went around, and it turned out that the actuary was there, and the insurance company was there, and the trustee was there, and the three unions were there, and I was there with a couple of other guys from Cravath and so on. And he said, whose law applies? Whose law applies? Well, the guy from Manny Hanny, that's the manufacturer's Hanover Bank in New York, said something like this: I'm from Manny Hanny, we're the trustee, we got all the money, and we got a trust agreement right here, and it says at the end right here, it's governed by the laws of the state of New York. Remember, there's no federal preemption, there's not even any federal law. Laws of the state of New York. The guy from the Globe Insurance Company who issued all the annuities, which is the way people really got paid, said, well, I'm from the Globe, we're from Toronto, we've got a group annuity contract here, and it says right here, it's governed by the laws of the province of Ontario. And so on around the room. Who are the necessary parties? Well, the only thing everyone agreed on, we're all necessary parties because you can't do any. Well, the actuary stood up and said, I'm from I forget which actuarial firm it was, and I'm the only guy in this room who knows what's going on, which is what actuaries always say. And so I thought I'd just come. Who are the necessary party? Everybody's a necessary party, and not only that, but none of them had been served. Because in a federal court sitting under state law, or even the most federal laws, you can't serve outside the jurisdiction of the state in which you are sitting. And the long-arm statutes had not yet been invented. So it was a terrible problem. And they ended up settling, in the end, the guys from South Bend, as Karen remembers, was 15 cents on the dollar for the senior employee. First of all, the retirees who were already retired didn't lose a penny, pretty much, I think. They got everything. But the order of priorities, which is still in ERISA, was there then. And first you pay the guys who were fully retired. And if there's anything left over, then you drop down to the vestees. If there's anything over, you drop down to the unvestees and so on. Well, after you got through paying the retirees, the guys who had been working for 30 years but weren't eligible to retire got 15 cents on the dollar.
More than that, that was the people from 40 age 40 to 60 got 15%.
Yeah.
Those that were under 40, even though they had as much as 20 years in,
Nothing.
got nothing.
Nothing.
And there were a lot of those.
The other
I
part-
had the numbers. There were 4,000 in that first group that got 15%, and there are 2,900 in the second group that got nothing.
Not fun at all.